So today we talk about, I don't want to get too hung up on numbers, this is our 7th forum on principle number 5, but what's important is to talk about responsible stewardship and use of university property, technology, and funds. And this is all, of course, bound by policy, but what's really important is that we have an overall sense of what we are doing, and we want some comfort that what we're doing in our daily work is consistent with university policy and is, as they say, roughly right and directionally correct. Because even as I have found, and my Director of Procurement and Supply has pointed out, I make mistakes in terms of which procurement card I'm supposed to use for what and why. And he was quite right when he told me at the beginning that I would make such mistakes. And so I've endeavored to educate myself, and this is an opportunity for all of us, I think, to hear from the people who really understand the stewardship of these things in the big picture. And we'll also have opportunity for them to answer your questions and your concerns as you raise them. So first I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we'll just kind of dive into an open conversation. I'll start with Jim Sterling. Jim is easy to pick out on the stage because he's the only guy. He's the university's Director of Procurement and Supply. He's been here at the university for how many years?
Like 12.
About 12 years. So, and is an alum and a fan of 2 Big Ten schools, the University of Maryland and the Pennsylvania State University. So game day will be quite interesting with Jim, I suspect. His department is responsible for stewarding the procurement of about $400 million worth of supplies, services, IT, software and hardware, facilities maintenance, architect engineer services and the like, and of course construction. So procurement handles the receiving, distribution, surplus property disposal, what we refer to as our Terrapin Trader operation, and it administers a procurement card program for the 1,700 cardholders who spend about $55 million a year over the course of 150,000 transactions. So that's just a huge volume. His experience here has earned him the coveted role as the primary representative of the University System of Maryland before the Board of Public Works in Annapolis, where he is respected for his knowledge and his level head. And we really appreciate that service. Shanice Patterson in the center is Associate Controller who has been a part of the Controller's office for almost 20 years. Her responsibilities include accounts payable, the College Park Working Fund, transactions interfaces between Maryland and the state, and the maintenance of all the electronic forms system, the forms that you use in our system, financial record system, both web and mainframe, and has a key role in the quality financial system implementation that's underway now. And finally, Amy Ginther. Amy is coordinator of Project Nethics, which is kind of an abbreviated network ethics within the Division of Information Technology, Security, and Policy Office. Project Nethics promotes the responsible use of information technology through user education and enforcement of policies. Amy is a member of the Peer Consultant Network with the Center for Leadership and Organizational Change, and I saw Laura here, director somewhere. There she is up front. Thank you. Someone has to take the front seats. Appreciate that. And Amy also previously served in the Office of Student Conduct as Assistant Director for Academic Integrity. So she brings administrative experience to this conversation from multiple sides of the university. So we all know that university funds, maybe we don't, but we will, that university funds, regardless of their source, are considered public funds under state law. And they are subject to state law and the policies that we have written both at the university system level and at the university level to govern their use. Policies are designed to support responsible use of our resources, but of course, human judgments are at play here, which is why we're all having this conversation as we think about how we interact with our resources under these policies. So I'd like to start with Shanice, and I'm going to touch on a topic that I think many in the room, not all, but many in the room have had some experience with at one point or another, and that is we use our own resources in the conduct of the university's business at a certain point in time with the expectation and anticipation under our policies that we'll be reimbursed for it. And sometimes it's unclear what we're supposed to do or what we're eligible to be reimbursed for, or we may ask for things that we're not and we don't understand why. And I wonder if you could maybe open with some comments about that.
Sure. As long as everyone has been searched for fruit, vegetables, and items, anything that you may throw at me, okay? To be reimbursed it's a very simple process. As long as what you are purchasing is within the guidelines of the state and of the university, you can be reimbursed. If it includes a meal, you must submit, along with a list of attendees, their affiliation with the university, an itemized receipt of the meal. What we use is the per diem rate to govern you, because we don't tell you how much you can spend. We are hoping that in the course of the meal or before the meal, you make a determination as to which restaurant you would choose. If you're bringing in an esteemed speaker that has published in many publications, we don't expect you to take them for a Happy Meal. But we don't expect is a $250 meal that we can't then justify. So a list of attendees with their affiliation to the university, an itemized receipt, and no alcohol, okay? Trust me, we know what Merlot is. We know it's not an appetizer, okay? So scan your invoices. I know that in the departments, dealing with faculty can be rough. I appreciate that. That's why the business managers out there are our front line. They do a great job making sure that what's in their scope is adhered to. But sometimes you have individuals that are very pushy. But you have to make sure that they are within our guidelines as well as the state. Because once you outlay your cash for a meal, for supplies, any purchase for the university, you are going to give up the right to own that supply, whether you purchased a laptop, a phone, because you have to then provide the receipt, the original receipt, no copies. If you make a purchase from Target, do not leave your receipt in the car, because then it becomes invisible. So you cannot submit the receipt with numbers written in, because that's not a valid receipt. So the state looks for us to provide that information to them. We cannot reimburse anyone for anything that is personal of nature, nor any gifts of sentiment, which are flowers, a retirement party, things of that nature. But what we can do is we can do employee awards, receptions, those things. You cannot be reimbursed for a meal amongst yourselves. That is the items listed in the policy for what you cannot be reimbursed for, list 5. Okay, so if you have an unusual hours or place does not mean I came in at 7:30 and I normally come in at 8. So that's an unusual time for me, so I should get breakfast. Unusual is if I have to go to ag, way out in the middle of a farm, and they bring lunch in for a seminar. That's an unusual place. What we cannot be reimbursed for is a payment by you or anyone on your staff to an individual for services, because that's 1099 reportable. It's a taxable event. So if we reimburse you, if we reimburse Glenda for paying Julie right, then we are participating in Julie's circumvention of paying income taxes. So that makes us culpable in that as well. So if you know you're going to have someone hired to perform a service, you have to come through the procurement process. Now, there's many out there to your avail. Straight through procurement, ELF procurement system, or your P card. When people outlay their cash, let's say books. If you write a book and you're going to come here and speak, and you want to purchase your book to give out, I have 2 problems. 1, conflict of interest, because you're going to receive a royalty for that book that we purchased and now reimbursing you. 2, it's a gift. And when I get entangled, my good friend Laura Wright in the back is who I call to help me out. So, I mean, it's a lot, but most of you know that if you're unsure, you call accounts payable. And either myself or Jackie Kilgore, who is the manager of AP, have absolutely no problem putting it in writing or having a conversation. If it's something unique, we will work with you because we want to be a help and not a hindrance with our research and other things that we have to get done. But you have to disclose the full situation, not just a little piece you want us to do. So when it starts to fall apart, we get, you didn't tell me that. Well, because you didn't tell me the full story in the beginning. So we would rather help you than become a hindrance to you. The state trusts us, so when they audit our batches, they know that we are going to be above board, and they even call us if they have an issue with another state agency. So we toe the line very well. We don't want to be in your way, but even when we're doing human research subjects, if you're paying someone to perform some type of research for you, you have to have an approved IRB. And if you're going to do small dollar cash outlays, you have to come through the MOU process, which is governed by the Comptroller's office through the Bursar's office. You cannot purchase gift cards using your P card to give to research subjects, so you can come through the working fund and we will issue a check to the PI or the custodian, and then you can cash it and go and make your purchase of your gift cards. For reimbursement to us, you have to provide the list of individuals, as long as it's not confidential, as to who received the gift card and their signature. Any questions?
Well, I do have a technical clarification. There was something you said that I had to think about for a little while, and I think I figured it out, but I want to make sure. If you go to Target and you get a receipt and you leave it in your car, it becomes invisible.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I wish the charges would become invisible because my domestic relationships would get a lot better. But what I think you mean is that the receipt is a thermally activated paper that the ink begins to fade if it's left in the sun. And so if you leave it on your dashboard or on your seat, is that what you meant?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Too bad. So there are times when we have members of our staffs or colleagues from the office, and we go to lunch, and it's a business lunch. And there's nobody else present from outside of the university. If it's a business meeting, is it reimbursable, or is it something that we can use university funds for? And this is directed to you or to Jim.
The cut and dry response is no. In the policy, we cannot have meals amongst ourselves. If you have individuals that have a legitimate reason as to why this is the only time that they can gather and come together, that has to be identified up front. But if me, Jim, Jackie, Amy decided we're going to go to lunch today and we're going to talk about the P-card for 10 minutes, and then we're going to have the university to pay us, that's not appropriate use of state funds. But if it's the only time that individuals can gather, professors have that issue, then that statement is written on the reimbursement.
And does that hold true if there are business purpose activities and outside guests related to those business purposes in a lunch setting?
Yes, that is true. If you have outside individuals that come in, without question, they can partake in the meal. You have to have someone that's not there, that's not a University of Maryland employee, yes. Which is why we ask the affiliation of the individuals that are participating in the meal.
Mm-hmm. And it can't simply be an outside friend. It has to be business. It
has to be
a business purpose.
It has to be a business purpose. You cannot grab anybody that you see walking on campus, say, come on, let's have a meal together, and I can write it off.
I mean, we chuckle about these things, but it happens.
Trust me, I have a file that I keep. If I want giggles, I look in the file.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
You used the phrase a couple of times, if that's the only time they can meet.
That's correct.
But what about as an extension of, we met all morning, we're going to meet into the afternoon? Keep the group together.
There are situations where if there's a group that is meeting all day on campus, not even on campus, but if they're meeting all day, lunch is provided. Because they're meeting all day, they don't want anybody to go anywhere so that you keep the group together. And actually the conversation continues through the lunch.
But would they have to be on both sides of the lunch?
Would they have to be on both sides of the
Would they
lunch?
have to be, I mean, can the lunch meeting end on the last part of the meeting?
Well, if the meeting is stretching over through the lunch hour, then yes. Okay. Gloria?
Could you
Slow
repeat
down.
the question? No, that too. But repeat the question for the video, please.
Okay.
I don't hear that.
The question that Sherry asked is if there is a group that is meeting all day, crossing the lunch hour, can lunch be provided? I paraphrased. And that answer is yes. If the group has to stay together and they're going to meet in the morning, stretching over the lunch hour, then yes, lunch is provided. Yes. Yes.
Do you have a preference, or does the university have a preference, whether people buy things through an office e-card or whether they purchase it themselves and then ask for reimbursement, or is it up to the employees?
My preference is that
Again, if you'd repeat the question.
Okay. The question is, does the university have a preference as to whether an individual pays for something out of pocket and seek reimbursement or to use a P card? The preference is that you use the procurement methods that are established on campus. That way the individual is not out of pocket and has to wait for a reimbursement to come, or if it's something that they cannot be reimbursed for, then they will be out of those funds. So if you go through the procurement process, everything is cut and dry, the vendor is paid, and you have no worries. Yes?
Hi. Just a clarification. You had said something about gift cards and how that might be able to be provided. If
Yes.
if there was a situation where they wanted to give a gift card as a student award for participation in whatever.
What we do with gift cards, the question is how to handle the purchase of gift cards. I paraphrased again. We allow the purchase of gift cards for research purposes through the working fund. What used to occur is individuals would take their P card and make purchases of gift cards. Well, you cannot use your P card for a cash equivalent, which is a gift card. So if there's a research opportunity going on campus and the department that's doing the research wants to issue gift cards to the people that are participating, the working fund will issue a check to the PI. We do not buy gift cards for student awards because you can go through the awards system to issue a student an award, and that's run through either the bursar's office or financial aid, through bursar's office. Thanks, Angela.
That's for university students, but for students participating in conferences or workshops that are being sponsored but are not university students, that would not apply.
We can make some type of concession, but to make a purchase for one gift card, the working fund is then cutting a check for $25 for someone to run to Target or Walmart to make a purchase of $25 and provide the receipts and the backup documentation so that our working fund gets reimbursed.
I just wanted to add to that, you know, with regard to the P card and the prohibition on using it for purchases of gift cards, as well as some other items that Shanice talked about earlier. A lot of that is governed by state policy. Our P card program is not our own. We actually piggyback off of one run by the state comptroller's office. And they have their own set of rules that we have to follow, and one of them being the no cash equivalents. Shanice spoke earlier about some things that maybe would raise a red flag. Gifts of sentiment. You know, you buy flowers for the assistant in the office, or it's somebody's birthday, and you buy a cake or something like that. Those kinds of things are looked at internally, either by my folks or depending on how you're processing it, Shanice's folks, but they're also audited by the state. There's somebody with the green eye shade sitting down in Annapolis who is looking for those kinds of things. And just to give you an example, they pointed out one time that we had transactions on there for flowers and lingerie, and thought that was something that might be out of line. Well, turns out we check it out, it was for the Performing Arts Center. you know, for a production that they were doing. So it was a legitimate purchase. So it's not always cut and dry.
What was the title of that one?
I could think one up, but it might not be appropriate.
So, Jim, we have a variety of types of funds at the university. As I indicated when we started, they're all considered public funds. But there are some people at the university who are, by the nature of their job, responsible for generating those funds, whether they're faculty doing research and bringing in extramural funding, or they are literally business operators operating an auxiliary type of enterprise at the campus. And I'm curious, not to have too many anecdotes, but I get a sense from some folks that are so attached to their work that they believe that what they're bringing in the door is completely discretionary from their own perspective as their own funds. And the manifestation of this comes usually in one of two ways: either the use of extramurally developed funds to buy something that is for personal use, with the argument that I raised these funds, nobody else raised these funds, so I'm going to use these funds for myself, or to do something similar, which is to use them for a university purpose that has a shared university business purpose as well as a private university purpose. So this question really is directed at any of the three of you because it touches on each of your areas. But when we have that kind of circumstance, how do we go about educating the campus community in the broader sense, beyond forums like this, about people's responsibility to the state, because we're a state entity, even when they are responsible for bringing the money in the door?
Well, on the bigger picture, I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding, you know, amongst you know, our community here that 10, 12 years ago we were somehow granted complete autonomy from procurement law. That's actually not the case. We were given quite a bit of leeway and develop on our own policies and procedures. And you'll have to take my word for it, they are substantially less onerous than maybe other state agencies have to deal with. But to your question about funding, you know, at a certain level, it's all fungible. Money that comes into the university's possession is state funding. The application of you know, a particular law or regulation or our procurement policies and procedures depends upon what the transaction is and what the source of the funds is. In some cases, everything applies. In some cases, we'll make a determination that there's an exclusion, and that gets documented for the record. Give you an example, I think that fits your question. Take an enterprise like Dining Services. Dining Services obtains funding largely from resale of food products to the students. It's money that stays within that the circle of that business enterprise, but some of the rules still apply. So when we recently did a multi-million-dollar procurement for food products to have the supplier deliver products to the dining facilities, we still had to take it to the Board of Regents and get authorization to do that procurement. So, you know, that's a little different than we would do, say, for, I see Carlo in the back there, capital project. Pretty much everything applies, you know, so he runs through the whole gauntlet. But it's less so in those sort of enterprise activities.
In the Comptroller's office, the Office of Contract and Grant Accounting paired with ORA, Office of Research Administration, and they provide a class on contract and grant. And that also includes the accounting as well as the spending. Anytime accounts payable receives an invoice for reimbursement, that form and documentation is forwarded to contract and grants so that they can review that grant to make sure that what is being purchased is applicable to that grant and is allowable on the grant. Once it's signed off by OCGA, accounts payable then goes ahead and makes the payment. If it's against a subaward or a purchase order, since it's already vetted, accounts payable doesn't need to do that extra step. But anything that's reimbursed or purchased outside a small procurement, a delegated purchase, we forward that to OCGA for appropriateness.
Yeah, and we run the checks you mentioned for purchases. Similar process. We check to make sure that all the grant terms and conditions are complied with. These are conditions that come along with the funding, and make sure that that information is flowed down to any subcontractors that are involved. It's just a matter of by accepting the funds for a particular use, we also accept the terms and conditions that come along with it, and we have to comply with them.
So if I have a, just to move from the intangible monies to physical things, if I have some office equipment that I'm replacing because it's, in my view, obsolete, but it's fully serviceable, can I sell it in order to provide funds to my department, not for myself, but for my department?
You can sell it, but there's a process for selling it, and that is through our surplus property disposal system. There is a campus-wide policy that sets up property disposal as one of my responsibilities. We run a warehouse operation just off campus, the Terrapin Trader, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And what we do is we will sell from the floor, in some cases auction off property. We keep a small percentage to cover the cost of our operation. The rest of the money goes back to the department that is disposing of the material. There are some things that have market value, and there are other things that essentially are recycled. You know, so you're not going to see a return on some items, but you know, we've done everything from furniture, computers. We sold a 75-foot research vessel for the Center for Environmental Science, trucks, cars, you name it. Pretty much have handled it.
Basketball hoops. I remember being over there on tour one day, and there were these great big backboards that had come out of a gym, and someone bought them.
A basketball fan, I'm sure.
Jim, could we donate equipment? Let's see, we have all computers, and we work a lot with nonprofits, other nonprofits. Could we donate those as well?
That's a loaded question, because I've worked with Gloria many times to do just that, not just computers, but furniture and things of that sort. Now, if one of your departments has sent the material down to us and is expecting to get some return on it, we would not allow for it to be donated unless you bought into that process. We are allowed to donate materials. We've done it for community centers, public schools, fire departments. I think we outfitted lockers and desks and beds that were surplus from a residence hall. We outfitted most of the firehouses in Prince George's County with those a few years ago. So, you know, the short answer is yes, we can do that, but it will be coordinated with whoever was the owner of the material.
Yes?
Is there another question? in the
Yes.
back?
I have a question. I am a fundraiser, so I'm in university relations, and we tap into foundation funds, and while we're on this topic of different pots of funding, and we're spending money that donors have given for different purposes that have their own set of policies, but I would just wonder if you could touch on your philosophy about that, or anything you would like for us to be thinking about for accessing those funds.
Anybody want to take this one?
We both.
We are
pass.
you did say you were working with foundation funds?
Yes, I work in university relations. And as a related topic, I used to manage those funds for Anne Arundel Community College, so I'm interested in how it's handled here as distinct from other state agencies where I've been employed.
We keep our foundation funds separate from state funds. We do not commingle those funds. We do have a separate unit that handles that just separately. If you have a purchase that you know it will not be reimbursed by the state of Maryland, normally the department will go to their foundation account to get that processed, but we do not commingle those funds at all.
And part of commingling is also combining funds from those sources for purchases that exceed your budget. So if you have a state budget of X and the purchase you want to make is more than that and you want to augment that budget with foundation funds, those funds have to be literally booked into the university, added to your budget for the procurement to happen from your budget, as opposed to simply combining those funds. And the reason for that policy is to maintain the integrity of the separation of the organizations. There are tax implications, but also it brings additional check to the integrity around the procurement thresholds for approval. So that what we don't want to do is encourage people to state that a procurement is using less state money than the approval level and then augmented with private funds in order to get around an approval process, right? So, of course, we're a university with very smart people and everyone wants to make things as easy as they can, and so people do look sometimes for shortcuts, and that's why the policy is in play that way. Are there other comments on that?
Broken record, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's a firewall between foundation funding and university or state funding. We can't mix them. I can't do anything with foundation funds. Those types of expenditures are covered under whatever the foundation's rules are. It's in the past been the subject of audit findings, so we're very careful to maintain that separation and pay close attention to that.
There are also nuances of appropriate use of funds based on the restrictions that are placed on those funds. So there are funds, for example, within intercollegiate athletics that are used to operate intercollegiate athletics, and we have, by our policy, not by law, but by our policy, made a decision long ago to not augment that particular department with state taxpayer dollars through our appropriation. Which is has been the subject of a lot of conversation of late, of course. And it's those kinds of policies that, though they're there for a purpose, the separation of auxiliary enterprises from appropriated tax dollars, it can be a little bit confusing. And so it's important that you know what resources you can reach out to, starting right in your own offices, with the business managers in your office, who probably is pretty well versed in that, but if not, then calls to the comptroller's office, to procurement, et cetera. I'd like to turn our attention at this point to something that I think is near and dear to many of us, and that is as we evolve as a society, becoming more dependent on electronic media for our fundamental work as well as for social interactions in our personal lives, the convergence of devices such as computers, televisions, telephones, and cameras, for example, is matched in the convergence of or a blurring of the line between the business world and our personal world. And so that leads to some confusion and some concern about the responsible use for university-owned property with respect to personal use. And it is coming into common parlance, terms like Cyber Monday after Thanksgiving, where only on your lunch hour are you apparently, according to the media, permitted to shop for things on your work computer at your desk. By the way, we have no such policy about Cyber Monday anywhere on our books, and I wonder if Amy could make some comments about how we're supposed to navigate these kind of rough waters.
Thank you. As I'm reflecting about our duties here, I'm thinking that this is the ask permission first side, and I may be a little bit more in the begging forgiveness later, which is a softer side to be on in some ways. In most of my work, that is true, that some of these issues are difficult and not so clear, and we can learn as we go. However, there are some things to keep in mind, and it is that many of us are in charge of or have, we touch sensitive data, and one of our duties is to protect that data, and one of the best ways of doing that is to not merge personal email account with work material. So the caution is to not shift your umd.edu account with an external account. That's probably a very good, safe way to avoid any sensitive data exposure, which is one of the chief duties that we want to abide by, is to protect that data. And then similarly, it's good practice to keep your personal activities in a separate account, and just be aware that that account, the umd.edu account, will not be available to us once we depart from the university. So that separation practice is a good one to start if you haven't been in the habit of doing that. So those are a few thoughts about that blend. Mm-hmm.
So many of us are becoming increasingly aware that we have a digital signature that likely will live a lot longer than we. And when you think about that as a legacy issue, maybe it'll make us a little more careful. But there are certain technologies that we are either exposed to or have opportunity to have in our possession that are mobile technologies that we also need to just be careful about not leaving behind somewhere, or be careful about not losing or exposing to theft. When I talk with Chief Dave Mitchell here in our regular meetings about the kinds of opportunistic theft that we see here at the university, typically it's people leaving a place, and there's typically students, but not always, leaving a place and leaving their materials there where they're either studying or working to go use a restroom or to get a soda at the fountain or something like that, and they come back and their backpack is gone, or their laptop is gone, or their phone that they had on the table is gone. And sometimes the risk is even more blatant. We had one of our vice presidents here at the university, a colleague, was vacationing with his wife in Paris, and they were just at an outdoor cafe, and he had his iPhone just sitting on the table. And you know, a group of young kids came by, and the iPhone wasn't on the table anymore. And that happens, you know, it can happen. And so we need to be mindful that part of our responsibilities with respect to university-owned materials is to protect them no matter where they are. And especially when you think that they're safe, that's probably a time when they're not. And so you should just be mindful. I would encourage you to be mindful of that.
And a couple add-ons to that. The police do have a stop tag device. It's not really a device, but it's a way to tattoo a laptop or any other device with a tattoo that makes it unappealing to the thief, because then it can be seen by wherever that item would be sold to or attempted to be sold as a stolen device. And that's available through the Crime Prevention Unit of UMPD. They also make cables available, cables that I think would be a approved procurement item for laptops that you're moving around with. So those are some things to think about to secure those devices and another way to protect that data.
So once upon a time, when we were all completely dependent on wired telephones at our desks, we used to wrestle, you'll recall, with the issue of, if I make personal phone calls that have a toll associated with them on my phone, do I have to, number one, pay for it, and how do we record it? And so many offices went through a process of a telephone log and prorating call costs and the like, and still do in some cases. But now we have these other devices that are mobile devices. They're wireless, and the way that billing is done on these wireless devices is designed by the relationship between the customer and the service provider, the cell service provider, to minimize transaction costs and to get you to use as much of the product or the service as possible at as low a unit cost as possible. And so we've begun to, in the industry, move away from opportunities to pay for X number of minutes and instead just get unlimited minutes. And when you are in a kind of role or position at the university that might require you to have mobile communications, and there are many of you in this room and elsewhere who do, then it becomes a question about how much of my use is for personal use versus business use, and how do we measure that, and what are our policies around that? And I wonder if any of the three can make some comments about that.
We do have a cell phone policy that I generally direct individuals to, as well as I direct them to John Farley, who has left the room. Don't tell him I said that. With the cell phone policy, the university makes the purchase of the phone and pays the subsequent bill. We did have an audit where a department struck a deal with the employee where the department would pay for the phone and the employee would pay for the monthly bill. Then the phone was shipped to not the employee, but the employee's wife. Then the bill was in the wife's name. Red flags everywhere. So if you're going to abide by the cell phone policy, please keep in mind that the phone is being purchased by the university, and the bill is going to be paid by the university and can be paid on your departmental P card. We have individuals that use their own personal phone, and like Vice President Spector said, we're in a world where you have unlimited minutes, technology, everything for $50 a month. But if they make one call on behalf of the university, they want to prorate their bill so that they get that 10 cents. So if we will attempt to accommodate as best we can. When people have their own personal phone and they're using it for University of Maryland business, they have the tendency to want to get their money back. And when it's the other way around, governing by the policy, you have the phone and the bill that is paid by the university, and you are then asked to review your bill to highlight which ones are personal versus which one is business related. A lot of people do not want to have two phones, which is a personal phone as well as a university issued phone. I hear that a lot, but it's cleaner. I have a phone that I purchased myself, and I use it tremendously for University of Maryland work. But it's my phone. When I leave, I'm taking it with me. I'm not giving it back to the university. But we do have that policy that's written where you have to identify the calls and reimburse the university for those personal calls. And that's calls. It doesn't say anything about web access or internet access or checking email. We can revisit that. Yes, Sherry.
That does raise the issue, though, that a lot of employees have been drawn into having their personal phone be increasingly used for university business.
Okay.
Whether it be email access or telephone calls. And I guess my question is, how
Well, the policy, I don't know if I even should say this. The policy is a little vague in that area. Like I said, for me, I have no problem using my own personal phone for University of Maryland business. I check my email, I review L forms, I do my timesheet. I do my own personal items with my phone as well. But if you have someone that's on a different level that is using their phone, whether they have to call in or make a call to someone while they're on vacation, it's just that one call. I will ask John to review the policy, but that's what the policy states. Yes. Yes.
Do you think, because it's becoming so cheap that it's no longer the issue of money, but the time resource?
Yes.
Work time that's being wasted that shouldn't be?
Exactly. It could be. It could be. I cannot say that for sure, but it could be. But you have individuals that may have a University of Maryland phone that is bought by the department and paid by the department and never make a call or anything for the university or to the university. The department has to make that determination, because once you allow the person to buy the phone, one mechanism is to review the bill. So now you're saying, is that phone warranted to be paid out of my budget if this individual is not doing anything related to the University of Maryland? So that could be another way to look at it as well. Yes, sure.
Following is the reverse of that.
That's correct.
Sherry, and for everyone, we're at a good point to begin to take many more questions. And what I'd like to do, if we could, is have folks come up and use the microphone, or if you would prefer not to do that, to stand up and speak very loudly so we can make sure that everyone can hear and that we can record.
Okay. Sherry, on the reverse end of that, what you can do with the person in the department is you can make your case to your department personnel, whoever you report to, that I use my phone 90% of the time for the University of Maryland. Okay.
Not to usurp your role here, but I have a question for Amy. And it's not related to who pays for it, but who owns the information, whether it be email, text messages, phone records, things of that sort. When somebody mixes the use on a device between their personal use and the university, does the university have access to all of the data?
It makes it tougher when I have yet to deal with an actual retrieval of text messages on a phone instance, but indeed the university owns the email account where those messages are being transmitted, and if that information is subpoenaed in any kind of action, we would need to get at that, and the user would need to understand that university business is retrievable by us for any kind of lawsuit or that sort of situation. Yep.
Yes.
A question about the use of the phones and the computers transfers, again, sort of the reverse. If in the office I work at, there are often some electronic proposals that have to be processed during a time when, say, the university is closed because of snow days or some sort of natural whatever. We run into that. So if the expectation is that the employee is going to use their personal home computer to cover those transactions, I understand, that you shouldn't use your office computer to conduct personal business. But can the university then go back and say, but you do have the obligation under certain circumstances to use your home computer to conduct university business, and how do you feel about that?
Sure.
Well, I might take the first shot at that.
Okay.
The analogy, I guess, would be personal vehicle use and mileage reimbursement for it. There are certain circumstances where it's appropriate to rent a vehicle through your departmental budget out of our motor pool, and you're off and running in, a prepared fueled car for your university business. There are other times when either the timing or the circumstance makes it much more effective and appropriate for you to use your own personal car and claim mileage. It requires additional transactions, of course, for the reimbursement to happen, and so when you extend that into over a lot of people, it really runs up the number of transactions and the expense of administering here at the university. But the basic concept is the same for technology as it is for vehicles, and that is it's the university's responsibility to provide the equipment and the training for the equipment to ensure that people can do their jobs well. And in those circumstances where it is not possible or highly inconvenient or disadvantageous to do those things, then it may be appropriate for you or others to use personal technologies to achieve university mission. That is very much a judgment and a negotiation within your office between the supervisor and employee about what the mission is, when it must be accomplished, and how to accomplish it. The value of overarching common sense and reason should come into play here. If once in a while there's a snowstorm and there's a deadline and I'm called upon to use my home computer to do something, no big deal. But if it's routinely expected that every weekend I'll be on my computer answering my boss's emails and doing the work of the university with my own technologies, then a negotiation within the department needs to happen in order to ask for and to receive the appropriate technologies to do your job. And if those aren't forthcoming, then you have to have a conversation about the job. That's the approach that I would take. And I'd open it up to other ideas.
What he said. Nice.
Are there other questions? Yes.
When will there be a time when Maryland will stop using our Social Security numbers on travel reimbursement forms?
Well, we can't stop using your Social Security number on travel reimbursement forms or any reimbursements that you may apply for, because your Social Security number is used by the state of Maryland to issue you your payment. What we have done, and my friends from travel are here, is they mask the SSN so that it cannot be seen. We are taking the same route when we implement COALI financial statements, where your SSN will only be seen by those that really need to see it and to transmit it down to the state of Maryland. Anyone that's doing business with the University of Maryland or any state agency must provide their SSN or FEI number, Federal Employee ID number, in order to be reimbursed or paid. So we're working on masking it at least. Yes? Your hand is up. I can't see you.
From an environmental perspective, I would love to see us be a little more green on all the paperwork that's required. And the IRS now, for our own personal taxes, will deem a scan receipt as sufficient for audit purposes. And I worked for another state agency where everyone had desk scanners and everything went paperless, and it was just a wonderful green. Also, the expense reports were much more detailed and easier for me to approve for all my staff. And I just am horrified, frankly, at the amount of paper that I see. I've only worked here 6 months, and at least in my department, it's one receipt per page, and it can be 30 pages on long trips. So I'm just wondering how we could get a little more green. And I totally understand the accountability process, but how can we make it a little more environmentally friendly?
Accounts payable love to make it environmentally friendly for everyone, since we have to touch every piece of paper that comes into our office. What the state's version of green is that we scan all of our invoices in and copy them to a CD and then send the CD to the state. That's not green, because I don't have the staffing to accommodate the state's green initiative. What we are trying to do in accounts payable, each processor has a scanner on their desk. We have been scanning images of invoices for the last 8 or 9 years, maybe 10. And we then have a virtual file cabinet so that each individual on campus that has access to their accounts can see their invoices without having to dig into a file. What we want to do is be able to send a file of scanned images to the state. We don't govern that. The state of Maryland does. The state requires an original receipt with an original signature. So we are making the attempts to see if we can get a file transfer down of imaged invoices. But until then, we have to abide by their policies and procedures.
Do you require one receipt per piece of paper?
No, that's how your department sends it. Your department sends one receipt on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, where there are other departments that put as many receipts on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper as they possibly can fit. It depends upon the department's processes that they initiate, not accounts payable. So that would be one initiative to start.
I'll take that back.
Yes.
It's holiday time, and many units want to have gatherings to celebrate the holidays. And what I guess, is the policy absolutely clear about that in terms of which funds they can use or not use to pay for those sorts of gatherings?
The state of Maryland policy is clear. No social functions, no holiday parties, no retirement parties can you spend state funds for. The Comptroller's Office has a party every year. We even have one Thanksgiving, and it's potluck. Yes, Gloria?
Yes, sir.
What about during those parties, these parties or gatherings, it's used as a recognition ceremony for employee recognition?
Employee recognition and awards are acceptable. It's in the policy that you can have an employee award. However, I caution you, do not have those award ceremonies during the Christmas time, because those invoices and receipts will come back. They will come back because the state feels that we're having a holiday party and masking it because out of 50 people, one person received a certificate of some sort. It's the world I live in. Sorry, Daryl. Sorry.
Additional questions? Yes, sir.
Wouldn't a retirement celebration be employee appreciation?
Again, Danny. You know I love you. If you are having a retirement, and I think that, let me check my policy.
She came prepared.
Because I knew Danny would be here. Let me see. Yes, employee awards and appreciation programs. Meals are not appropriate for personal meals among employees, routine meetings, general discussion meetings, and any social functions. Now, if I take your invoice and I send it down to the state, it's going to come back. Danny, you're blinking. Any other questions?
There is some distinction, though, I believe, wrong, between this type of thing for faculty versus staff. Is that correct?
I don't have any distinction. If you all have a distinction in your department, I do not know about any distinction between faculty and staff. To me, everyone is an employee of the University of Maryland and is on the same ground. I'm glad I don't work in academic stuff.
Laura.
I have a question, and it's geared for you, Amy. Sometimes people aren't sure where to turn if they receive emails that feel harassing, or it could be texts. Can they turn to your office for something like that?
Yes, thank you, Laura. One of the roles I play is to assist And it's primarily in the student body where conflicts arise and accounts may be intruded upon because students share passwords readily with each other, which is a cautionary tale for us all to keep those passwords secure. So a lot of times conflicts arise and things can go awry in their relationships, and that often happens via email or via text or via listservs that are used to sabotage a reputation by sending out an angry or hurtful message to a larger group. That also happens in the faculty and staff realm as well. So we are at the ready to hear about and look at any of these messages to see if we can get at the origination point and then work with the appropriate authorities, whether it's law enforcement internally or externally. Some of these situations have resulted in people seeking peace orders in nearby courts. Some have been handled internally through a department or the Office of Student Conduct receiving a referral in the case of a student-to-student conflict. So we're here to sift out what we can act on, what we can discover about those kinds of troubling messages. And even if a case dead ends because we can't discover the origination of it, I think people are helped by trying to problem solve, seeing what other resources there are of use to them on campus. If it's the sexual assault reporting program in the health center, I don't have that acronym right, but the SARP program in the health center where there's a victim advocate, we would work in company with all of the appropriate resources to help that person put that incident behind them. Often it may also, if you encounter out in the work with students that you do those kinds of conflicts arising, we also work very closely with Resident Life in discovering what can be a support in that realm for that student. So all of the populations will try to see how we can help.
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to ask if the state paid for student groups that gather during the holidays to have holiday parties. I've had several times yes and sometimes no.
So the question is a bit akin to one that we heard, and that is, does the state budget support holiday parties? Is that your question?
Yes, they pay dues every semester, and we save the semester dues that they pay in account.
Okay. So you're collecting money from the students or employees? Okay, you're collecting money from the students during the semester. And at the end of the semester, you take those funds and you have...
So at the end of the year, actually, they normally want to have holiday gatherings. So now they want us to pay for the food and everything that we purchase. They will reduce, but in the meantime, we will always save the dues in our state budget.
Okay. Okay, from what I'm understanding, you gather the money from the students, and at once a year, you want to take that money and spend it on a holiday party. You should not commingle those funds into your FRS account, okay? Because in order to spend it out of your FRS account, you have to procure and then say that it's for a holiday party. So I would not commingle those funds, that your dues that you're collecting from the students. Okay? You're welcome.
I think we have time maybe just for one more question, if there is one, before we wrap up. Yes, Laura.
Without being embarrassing that. So I know to get a P card, you have to go to training, but for new employees who don't get a P card or a travel card, what's the mechanism? Because I don't want them asking me what the rules are. How do they get trained?
Marty Newman and I normally host a AP Procurement 101 class, and it went very well. We did it for about a year, and then we took our show on the road. We would go visit departments that asked us to come out and do training. And subsequently, Jackie Kilgore has replaced me with Marty and doing those trainings. We've done arts and humanities, BSOS, engineering, ag. So we've done a number of departments.
So you would request that?
Yes.
Ask and ye shall receive.
Yes. You're welcome.
This has been a very, very good and helpful exchange of information. I want to ask all of you to thank our panelists once again. As we wrap up here, there are just a couple of brief comments, and then Gloria asked to make a closing remark. First, this is the gathering that kind of ends not only the calendar year, but also the full discussion of each of the principles that we have in our program, and it remains to be seen how we're going to continue or evolve these conversations. I would be very interested in your feedback, in your interest, and in your suggestions for the kinds of conversations about things that matter like this. And we would welcome your emails or telephone calls to my office, to VP Administration and Finance. You'll find contact information on our website. And I would encourage, we want to hear from the people who attend especially, because you are obviously already interested customers. And we want to make sure that, that as we continue, if we continue, that we're meeting your needs and your interests, as well as providing an opportunity for us to get information out that we think everybody needs to hear.